Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to the Suburban Rifleman. Happy Martin Luther King Day. Happy Inauguration Day. I'm going to try to keep this short, but I'm probably going to do a bunch of talking. There's no shooting in this video. If I'm a little bit too long-winded for some of you, please feel free to use the scroll bar down at the bottom. You can fast forward until you see whatever you want to see that I'm talking about. So several weeks ago, I posted a video which went about as close to going viral as any video I've done so far. I had, I think, over 15,000 views in one day. And so there was definitely interest in the subject matter, and I thought I would give you a bit of an update on what happened. Of course, I'm talking about my Smith and Wesson model 629. A lot of people had a lot of interest in that video, and a lot of people had a lot of comments and suggestions. And I just wanted to give you an update on how it went, sending my 629 back to Smith and Wesson for service, and also my general experience with Smith and Wesson customer service over the years. I'm not going to say that it's gotten better or gotten worse. I'm just going to tell you my personal experience based on two different incidents. But since most of you are probably here for the 629, I'm going to start with this one, even though this was the second time I dealt with Smith & Wesson customer service. And for those of you who aren't familiar, I'm not going to go over the whole thing. The revolver stopped working after 14 rounds, just locked up on me. And I did send it back to Springfield. And yes, I had some comments, at least one comment on the last video that, well, your revolver is not going to be going back to Springfield. It's going to be going to Maryville, Tennessee. I can assure you that the return shipping label that they sent me went to Springfield, Massachusetts. I tracked the shipment to Springfield. When they shipped the revolver back to me a couple of days ago, and it arrived here today, it came from Springfield, Massachusetts. So, I don't know, it would be incredibly inefficient for them to send the revolver from Springfield to Tennessee, back to Springfield, back to me, but maybe that's what they do. I don't think so. I think the Performance Center is still in Springfield, Massachusetts, and traditionally it's been or at least back in days of yore, it was the Performance Center that performed warranty work. So my revolver went to Springfield. It came back from Springfield. Beyond that, I have no idea what happened to it while it was there. I will put an end card at the end of this video that links back to that first video if you want more detail on what was wrong. But anyway, I sent the revolver out. I'm filming with my phone, so I can't check my texts. But I sent the revolver back on, I think, New Year's Day, or maybe the day after New Year's Day. And I just got it back today. Of course, today is the 20th, so they had it just about 3 weeks. Pretty decent turnaround time. And the upshot is my revolver is in fact working. It cocks in single action. It fires in double action. The timing seems to be spot on. And overall, the revolver, I was pretty pleased with it when I first received it before it stopped working. The barrel seems to be on pretty straight. I would say it was maybe 1 or 2 degrees over torqued, but that might just be my imagination. It locks up nice and tight on every chamber in the cylinder. There's a little tiny bit of play, but not much, just as it's supposed to have a tiny little bit of play. There is one chamber in this cylinder, and I'm on it right now, that is Colt Python tight. There's maybe a tiny little bit of play, but not much. I mean, this revolver is timed correctly, and it locks up nice and tight, and until it stopped working, it seemed like it was shooting okay. Now, I did get some documentation back from Smith & Wesson. And I'm not going to show you this because it has my address. Actually, this one doesn't have my address on it. But anyway, I'll read it to you. And it says, this is the repair order completion. It says there was a timing issue, which I didn't report, but it wasn't working. So I guess that's a timing issue. And it says here, fired in single action, but in double action, trigger, and then it ends. So I don't know. Maybe that's just a brief description of what I reported was wrong. And so it says here, they perform service, evaluate/repair. That's informative. Clean gun. Well, I can tell you right now that's BS, because there is still powder residue around, some little scorch marks and powder residue around the front of the cylinder here from the 14 rounds I did fire. And there's also some firing residue here at the muzzle. So clearly they didn't clean the gun, or if they did, they didn't clean it very thoroughly. Maybe they cleaned off whatever kind of crap got on it at the service center, but it wasn't cleaned. What else does this thing say? And then it says it repaired the sear. And that's pretty much it. So it is working. Now, when I sent the pistol back, Revolver for all you pedants, when I sent the Revolver back to Smith and Wesson, I included in the box a letter formally written to whom it may concern, describing what I was experiencing. And in addition to the fact that the Revolver wasn't functioning at all, another thing I brought up was the fact that it closes a little bit hard in some positions. Not all positions. Some positions it closes very easily. Other positions you got to kind of snap it in. Well, that's not one of them, but so anyhow, the reason for that, I believe, is that the end of the ejector rod here is very asymmetrical. It was ground really kind of weird. It wasn't done on a lathe. Well, I mean, it was originally shaped on a lathe, but then an adjustment was made with sort of a grinder where it has this weird bevel on one side. I'll show you a close-up of that. And I said, I think that's the problem with the Revolver, why it closes kind of hard like it just did there. And it's not terrible, but and then other times it closes very easily like you would expect a Smith & Wesson to do. Well, I can tell you that they ignored my letter because they didn't address that at all. Now, this is something I can deal with myself. I have access to all kinds of metalworking equipment, and I probably won't even use a machine. I'll do this by hand. And maybe it's better off. I mean, considering the fact that it left the factory like this, maybe I'm better off actually fixing it myself. So they didn't do anything about that, but it does seem like it's working. It does lock up tight. The timing is on. The trigger pull is nice and smooth in both double action and single action. I think I'm going to love this Revolver, and I'm glad I only paid about 50% of retail for it. Brand new, by the way. I got it on a very deep sale, plus $150 rebate, which took it down to like 50% of the MSRP. But I think if I had paid $1,100 or $1,200 for this Revolver, I would probably be a little less enthusiastic about it. But I think it's going to be great. I'm going to shoot it. Next time I do that, I'll get it on video and you can see it. And so for those of you who are just here for the 629, you can tune out now. But I have another customer service experience to relate, which happened about 15 years ago with Smith & Wesson. And it was much, much different than this. Not that this was unsatisfactory. They did correct the problem. The Revolver seems to be working properly. But I wouldn't say they went above and beyond. And my last experience with Smith & Wesson customer service was in regards to my Smith & Wesson Model 442 Airweight. And this is probably my most used gun. I carry this more than I carry almost anything else. I've got it in a little Don Hume pocket holster. It's something I can just throw it in a coat pocket. I can throw it in one of my jeans pockets. When something goes bump in the night, this is the Revolver I grab and throw in my pocket. It's always loaded. Well, it's not loaded right now, but it's usually loaded and ready to go. And this is just a fantastic little Revolver. It was made in 2008, so it's not a pre-lock, I think the stupid Hillary holes were already in effect in 2008, but it is a no-lock revolver, as you can see here. So even after the introduction of the internal lock, Smith and Wesson still continued to offer a limited range of models without the lock, and the 442 was one of those. Now, when I bought the revolver, it was a very, very standard all-black Smith and Wesson model 442. It had a carbon steel barrel, which it still does, and it had a carbon steel cylinder and obviously an aluminum grip frame. It is an air weight after all. So after I'd had it for about a year, I would say maybe 2009, maybe 2010, and I hadn't really shot the revolver a whole lot. I'd only ever put those CCI target loads through it. They were soft cast, double-ended wad cutters in an aluminum case, very mild recoil, very mild pressures. So I hadn't put any, it is actually rated for plus P, but I hadn't put any plus P ammo or any heavy hand loads or anything through it. And I just happened to be on a Smith and Wesson discussion forum, I believe. This was back before Reddit was a thing. And somebody was talking about a batch of Smith and Wesson J frames in a certain serial number range that were getting bulged chambers in the cylinders, that the cylinders had been heat treated incorrectly. If you look at the J-frame 38 cylinder, you can see that it has very, very thin chamber walls on the outside here. And that's because they essentially took a 32 caliber 6-shot cylinder and changed it over many, many, many years ago to a 5-shot 38 caliber cylinder, and you end up with very thin chamber walls. So heat treatment is very, very critical. And it was only carbon steel cylinders, and it was only in a certain serial number range. So I looked at my serial number in 2008. I think this was made. And sure enough, I was in that range. And I carefully looked down the outside of the cylinder, and sure enough, it looked as though the chamber walls were bulged at the very thinnest part of the cylinder. So I took out my micrometer, or actually I don't think I have a micrometer that opens that wide, probably my digital caliper, and I measured, and it did in fact seem that right on the thinnest section of the chamber wall, the cylinder was larger in diameter. And I looked again, and I was pretty sure I could see a bulge there. So I contacted Smith and Wesson, and they were very proactive. They immediately got back to me and said, no, we want that revolver sent back here as quickly as possible. And they sent me, as they did with my 629, they sent me a return label. I slapped it in a box. I dropped it off at FedEx, and off it went. Now, that time, I also included a letter in my package, and I said to them, look, if in fact the cylinder is bulged and it turns out that you do need to replace the cylinder, I have read that stainless steel cylinders are less likely to bulge. The stainless steel is a little bit tougher, and apparently the heat treatment was done correctly on the stainless steel cylinders. So if you're going to replace the cylinder anyway, please contact me at this phone number or email address and tell me how much it would cost to upgrade to a stainless steel cylinder. And I will gladly pay you the difference because I'd really like to have a stainless steel cylinder fitted into the revolver. I didn't hear anything back from Smith and Wesson for about 2 weeks. And then finally I got a notice that there was a adult signature required FedEx delivery coming to me one day from Springfield, Massachusetts. And I thought, okay, my 442 is coming back. I guess they couldn't help me out with a stainless steel cylinder, but I'll be happy to get my revolver back anyway. And I signed for my package. I opened the box up and there was a stainless steel cylinder fitted into my revolver. They never even bothered to get back to me and say, well, it'll be an extra $25 or whatever. They just said, we'll put a stainless steel cylinder in it for him. And at that moment, I became a Smith and Wesson hardcore fan. I was just like, that's customer service for you. Now, the work order report that came with that revolver, and this does have my address on it, so I'm not going to send this, I'm not going to turn this around for you to see, but it says, customer complaint, hard extraction. I didn't complain about hard extraction. Customer complaint, cylinder loose on stop. I didn't complain about the cylinder being loose on the stop. I complained that I thought perhaps the cylinder was bulged. Repaired, replace cylinder. Repaired, replace cylinder, stop. So, what this looks like to me is this is customer service basically making some stuff up so that management wouldn't question why they completely replaced the cylinder with a stainless steel cylinder. And of course, they had to put a new cylinder stop in because I think those have to be mated up together. And that's customer service right there. I was very, very pleased, and I was already sort of a fan of Smith and Wesson, but after this experience with Smith and Wesson customer service, and as I mentioned earlier, in those days, and I think still today, it looks like, all of your warranty claims went back to Springfield and they went through the Performance Center. And I don't know if it was a documented fact, but it was widely considered to be true that the guys in the Smith and Wesson Performance Center couldn't stand to send a revolver or pistol back unless they had made it a little bit better than when it came in, more than just fixing the warranty problem. And oftentimes they would do a little fluff and buff, a 5-minute trigger job on the revolver to make it a little bit nicer. And when this came back, I'm not going to say it had a bad trigger when I sent it to them, but when it came back from warranty service, it was just smooth as silk. It locks up pretty tight. Timing is perfect, but it was just smoother in some way. It was still quite heavy. It was about 12 pounds, but very, very smooth. Now, since then, I put an Apex spring kit in here, which has a lighter mainspring, a lighter trigger return spring, a lighter firing pin spring, and a reduced mass firing pin. And that took it down from 12 pounds, extremely smooth, to now 9 pounds, extremely smooth. Just one of my favorite revolvers. And that was a great, great experience with Smith & Wesson customer service. But again, 15 years ago, maybe 16 years ago at this point, as I said, the revolver was practically brand new. And the factory cartridge case, I have in a little envelope in the case, says that it was manufactured in 2008. So I don't know if things have gone downhill with customer service. They're certainly not quite as informative, but the 629 does appear to be working now correctly. And the trigger's quite good on this. The single action is quite good on this. I don't know if they actually did anything to it. It does say they replaced the sear. I believe it said they replaced the sear, or they repaired the sear, whatever that means. The single action on this is sublime. And the double action is not too bad either. So all in all, a satisfactory resolution. I will let you know how it goes. I'll certainly show you this being shot, hopefully in one of my very next range videos. And when I do that, I hope to see each of you here then. Later, guys.